Barney comes in Iowa, Carroll, Iowa, and says, let's see, I'm teaching through Romans 8 and see Paul is speaking to the Jews as elect and predestined, having a debate. Who is Paul addressing in Ephesians 1? They're saints, chosen and predestined. And thank you, Barney, in Iowa. Now, Romans chapter 8, of course, I am going to assume that, let me pull up my scripture here, because I'm assuming that Barney is talking about, let's see, maybe even beginning in probably earlier than verse 28, but you remember verse 28 says, we know that all things work together for them who love God and are called according to His purpose, for whom He did foreknow. Whom He did foreknow, He did predestinate to be conformed to the image of His Son. Now, again, standard Christian theology out there say, well, that's me. He foreknew me. I'm the predestined. I'm the elect. But remember, you always have to let Scripture interpret Scripture. In fact, it's hermeneutically irresponsible to define those whom He foreknew by any other means other than letting the Scripture define that. And you can go to passages like let's see, Romans is it chapter 11, verse 2? God has not rejected His people whom He foreknew. And His people there is very obviously in Romans chapter 11, it's the Jewish people. So the Jewish people are the foreknown, or the nation of Israel is the foreknown. And those whom He did foreknow, He predestinated and predestined, called, justified, glorified. And it goes on through that. And who shall lay a charge against God's elect? Again, I think that's all in the context that normally we start with Romans chapter 9, but I think it starts back earlier in chapter 8, as Barney's doing here, and saying, no, chapter 9 is about the nation of Israel, and chapter 8, at least the beginning where it talks about the predestination, is about the nation of Israel. So that's exactly right. I think you've got that right, Barney. And then along with that, let me just tag on to his question, because he says, who is Paul addressing in Ephesians 1? Now, that question of whom Paul is addressing in Ephesians 1, I think, is, of course, of utmost importance, because Ephesians 1, especially verse 4, says, according as He hath chosen us in Him before the foundation of the world. I remember having a conversation with a professor one time. He's a professor now at Southern Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky, which of course is a bastion of Calvinism. And I said to him, could it be, this is before I had all my theology together, I said, could it be that the nation of Israel is the elect? And I remember we were having lunch together. He said, no, it can't be, because of Ephesians chapter 1, verse 4, which says, according as He hath chosen us in Him before the foundation of the world. And I didn't have everything together. I said, oh, well, you're right. He's chosen us in Him before the foundation of the world. But Barney brings up a good question. Who is us? In fact, I had a question come in earlier also. Let's see, this question, let me find this question here. It comes from Steve in Idaho Falls, Idaho. And the question is very related. It says, does Ephesians 1:4 support the doctrine of unconditional election? So here, Barney's question is, who is us in Ephesians 1:4? Very related, does that support this idea of unconditional election? In fact, let me just read Steve's question. It says, Ephesians 1:4 is used by Calvinists to support their doctrine of unconditional election. Who are the us that are chosen before the foundation of the world in this verse? Now, I want to look just quickly, if we can, at Ephesians chapter 1 to help answer this question that Barney and Steve give, and one in Iowa and one in Idaho. And Paul, in the book of Ephesians, very clearly says, though we often skip over it, he's got these pronouns that I think are absolutely essential. I preached through the book of Ephesians. I'm going to do it again one of these days because it's not all available online. But I think that we just miss the us's and the we's and the you's. Me versus you. And if we're talking, then again, in normal language, us, is one group of people, and you is another group of people. Now, I want you to notice verse 4 again. according as he hath chosen us in him before the foundation of the world. Again, we want to quickly assume us is me and Steve and Barney and a few other people. That's us, chosen before the foundation of the world. But what did Paul mean when he said us? Now, to help in this, very consistently in verses, 3 through 12 at least, it is us, us, us. He hath chosen us before the foundation of the world. Verse 5, he has predestined us. And in verse 7, in whom we and us, obviously the same, we have redemption. In verse 8, he hath abounded toward us. And verse, we can go on in verse 11, in whom we have obtained. So there's the us and we in verses 1 through 12. But now I want you to notice verse 13. It says, in whom ye also trusted, after that ye had heard the word of truth, the gospel of your salvation. Wait a minute. In verse 13, he shifts, and he is no longer talking about us, he's talking about you. Now, I think theologically, when you put this together, he's not just necessarily saying, Paul and whoever is with me, Paul is us, and you, whoever's not here with me in the room, but he's speaking very clearly, I think, of the nation of Israel, us, the Jewish nation, predestined, as Romans chapter 8 says, and 9 through 11 says, and then there is the you also. And Paul, one of his main points in the book of Ephesians is to show that there was an us who was in the commonwealth of Israel. In Ephesians 3, I believe it's verse 12, there was us in the commonwealth of Israel under the covenants of Israel, and there was you who were once far off, and now you have been brought near to us. Carry these through in Ephesians, especially verses chapters 1, 2, 3 of the book of Ephesians. Us versus you, us versus you, us versus you. It either means something, or Paul is just a very sloppy writer. And remember, all Scripture is God-breathed. It's inspired of God. Every word of the graphe, the Scripture, is inspired of God. So it has to be inspired that Paul is saying, us, you, us, you, us, you. And I'm convinced the us in Ephesians chapter 1 is the nation of Israel. And if you go through chapters 1, 2, and 3, especially closely in that, I think you'll follow that through and you come to some, what I think is just some tremendous theological insights. And so then more to the point of Steve's question, does Ephesians chapter 1, verse 4 support the doctrine of unconditional election? I would say that yes, it does, but the question is, for whom? Those who are elect, I'm convinced, are unconditionally elect. The Calvinists got it right there. You can't elect and unelect and that kind of thing. That's not really the election of the Scripture. Election is unconditional. The question is, who did he elect? Or whom did he elect? And the Calvinists jump and say, he elected me, he elected Barney, he elected Steve. He did not elect, James and Mary and Susie and, these other people. But he elected us, not them, and we are unconditionally elect. Now, that's the mistake of the Calvinist, is carrying the election of Israel over into the election of individuals. And I think that that is an abuse of Scripture. Actually, it's not what the Scripture says, and it's almost the Achilles heel of Calvinism. Good question there. I hope that I have answered that faithfully there.